I am going to refer to some notes on this one just so I make sure I hit all of the points that I want to hit in a certain order for this, because I think the order in this particular story matters. This is a story about why I canceled an entire person. And I didn't think about it that way until I started talking to Corin about it the other day. She was like, holy shit, you canceled an entire person for basically 30 years. But for at least a legit full year. I was born on a cold night, 54, yeah.
Asshole.
When Corin asked me to do storytelling, she said that one thing she hates is when people start with the very beginning of their lives. I was born on the, so I was, as soon as she said that to me over the phone, I was like, oh, I'm fucking definitely starting a story like that. Seriously. When I was 2, my dad left to get milk and, well, never came back. Seriously. Literally walked out the door, go buy milk, never returned. My mother had 3 other children from another marriage, previous marriage. And all of those children were way much older than me, already out of the house by the time I came along. I was raised kind of as the baby and then kind of on a side benefit as an only child. So I had kind of the best of both worlds there. I frequently heard my mother say, as I grew up, and as you heard in the introduction that Corin gave about me, I am a first generation high school graduate. So even though I had I had a brother who was 20 years older than me, a sister who was 18 years older than me, and another brother who was 13 years older than me, I was the only one who graduated from high school. So even though all of these 3 brothers and sisters were out of the house, they had dropped out of school. My youngest brother dropped out to be a professional wrestler. Ask me how that went after the thing. My oldest brother was within the Marine Corps and was already serving in Vietnam, and my sister dropped out to get married to her high school sweetheart. So I was the only one left. Frequently, I heard my mother say, I screwed up with all the other 3. I'm going to do right by you. You're going to graduate from high school. You're going to go to college. You're going to get a job that you don't have to depend on a man for. This is it. So I knew from a very, very young age that education was really important to my mother. That was cemented in my head. The summer before my 4th grade year, my mother found my father. He was living in Savannah with his wife. Now keep in mind, he never divorced my mom. That might be a little bit of a problem, legally. So yeah, she had him arrested. She sued him for alimony, child support, all the stuff that you should do. And because of all of the legalities, he was granted 2 weeks visitation, 1 in the summer, 1 at Christmas, to begin immediately. This was the summer before my 4th grade year. So about a week before my 4th grade year in school, in July, in Georgia, this man that I had no memory of picked me up with a woman that I had never met, drove me to Savannah to a house that was not mine, to play with her grandchildren who I did not know, and to be told every single time, he didn't turn on the air conditioning the entire time, Savannah, Georgia, in July. Daddy, it's hot. Can we turn on the air conditioning? Well, if I didn't have to pay your mama so much in child support, maybe I could turn on the air conditioning. We'd go out to eat, and her grandchildren would order sodas and ice cream. Daddy, can I have ice cream? Well, if I didn't have to pay your mama so much in child support, maybe I could buy you some ice cream. That was the message I got every day. In no way am I exaggerating. Absolutely the worst, and I mean the worst week of my life in my 8-year-old career. And in my brain, it was my mom's fault. I cried the week before, the day before he was coming, and she sat me down and she told me, you're going to go spend a week with your dad. I don't know him. I don't want to go. Why do I have to go see my dad? You got to go. She made me go. So in my brain, this was all her fault. I wouldn't have suffered this worst week of my entire life if she hadn't made me go. Now, I was a good kid. I really was up until 4th grade. But at that moment, my vindictiveness kicked in. I got a little bit of a sigh. Mariana, keep your mouth shut. I needed somebody to suffer the way I had suffered that week. And the only person that I could target was my mother. And the one thing that I knew she valued at the top of her list was my education. And I had control over that. So I went in 4th grade year determined I was going to be the worst kid I could possibly be. Had not had this in place at all. Kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. I got other stories that I could tell about other things that happened. But basically I was a pretty good kid. I followed the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. I got good grades. I did all the stuff. That year, I lied, I cheated, I stole, I fought, you name it, I did it. My mom used to say, years later, she'd say, you weren't ADHD, you weren't OCD, you were just BAD. And I wasn't. I was just plain old BAD. At the end of that, she suffered. I can't even imagine. I look back now and I can't even imagine. She suffered through my entire 4th grade year with me making her, like I told Corin, they would pass out the spelling test and I would answer every question, spell every word correctly. And then she'd call for the spelling test to be passed up. And at the last minute, I would go and just flip letters or erase letters purposely, just so I would fail the spelling test. And I did that on purpose. I remember in 4th grade having that purposeful thought. So at the end of the 4th grade year, she was like, I've had enough of this bullshit. She sat me down at our kitchen table and she said, this is enough. You're better than this. This is not who you are. So she and I sat down and we created a pact. And I look back at that now and this was revolutionary. My mom was illiterate. My mom did not make it past 5th grade. She had the forethought when I was in the 4th grade to sit down with me. And we created a paper that had 2 columns. A column that said this is what my mom would do, and the other column said this is what I would do as we entered the 5th grade year. She said, because we are not doing this shit anymore. So she made I made a list of things that I needed her to do, that I would continue to have trust in her and believe her, and then she had things, well, you're going to make good grades, you're going to do this. We signed it, we put it on the refrigerator, it was a thing. Revolutionary. I just never look back at my mom and it just makes me shudder to think that she had that thought, that idea. So going into 5th grade year, I was really going to follow that. That thing was on the refrigerator. It was gold. It was the law in our house. I really, really, really was going to follow it. And then what I like to refer to as the cough drop incident occurred. Picture me, my 9-year-old self, Virginia, super cute, little Western style outfit, got my cowboy boots on, got it going on, going to school. And I woke up that morning with a little bit of a scratch in my throat. So on the way to school, my mom stopped at the corner store, still there, and she bought me, I ran in, and I got a box of Luden's Wild Cherry Cough Drops. Raise your hand. You see, you got it. You know.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, they're magic.
Candy.
Guaranteed to cure any cough, right? All right, super guaranteed. But my super cute outfit didn't have any pockets. So I put my cough drops in my cowboy boot. No worries. Went off about my happy little self to Bobby Anderson's 5th grade class. Unaware, completely oblivious that my life would soon be changed forever. Well, maybe not forever. And everything went well. We were going about our happy little selves until about midway through math. And the guy sitting beside me, Bart Marsh, if anybody knows him, he still lives here in Macon. Let me know. He raised his hand about halfway through math. Miss Anderson, I can't find my cough drops. Oh, goodness. What kind of cough drops did you have, Bart? Those in the white box. I think they're Luden's. Everybody stop what you're doing. Let's go help Bart find those cough drops. So just like everybody else in the class, I got up and helped Bart look for his cough drops. And we looked and we searched around. And after a minute or two, I looked up and Miss Anderson was standing at the door to the classroom. It's the motion I got. Motion. So I went to the door. Hand them over. Hand what over? The cough drops. I know you have Bart's cough drops. Hand them over. I don't have Bart's cough drops. Yes, you do. I see them hiding right there in your boot. Hand them over. These are mine. Call my mom. My mama bought these for me on the way to school this morning. Oh, I'm sure she did, and that's why you felt the need to hide them in your boot. Since I wasn't giving her the cough drops, she decided to take them. So So she reached in and snatched the cough drops out of my boot. From that point forward, there was a flurry of activity. Miss Anderson sent me to the principal for stealing. The principal paddled me for stealing. I got sent back to the classroom. They were all at recess. Miss Anderson magically produces this paddle from her desk and takes me to the janitor's closet across the hall and paddles me for stealing. The entire time, I'm crying. These really are my cough drops. Please believe me. I didn't take them. Please believe me. These are my cough drops. After recess, my desk, which had been at the front of the row, had been moved to the back of the row. And at one point, I'm not sure how long in, Bart turned around and went, stuck his tongue out at me, which solidified the idea that he was just being an ass. And if I'm going to be completely honest, I probably did fuck him over at least once or twice in 4th grade, because, yeah, I was that bitch in 4th grade. And there's probably a little bit of a motive there. So we're just going to go with that. But from that point forward, I hated Miss Anderson. You may recall, got a little bit of a vengeful streak. So because I had suffered humiliation, I had suffered embarrassment, I had suffered pain, somebody had to pay. This time it wasn't my mom. This time it was Miss Anderson. My plan was simple. Academically, I would stay on point for my mom because that was in our pact, and I could not break our pact. That was law. That was on the refrigerator. It had to be done. But in every other area, I was going to fuck Miss Anderson over. I promise you I did. That woman would come to the recess, call us in, I'd sit up on the playground, I'd sit up on the recess, on the monkey bars. Every kid would line up. Once every kid was in line, I'd walk as slow as I could and get in line. She'd tell you to put your name on the right-hand side of the paper, I'd put it on the left-hand side. Put your papers here, I'd put them over there. You name it. I did everything I could to make that woman's life miserable. I canceled her for the rest, thank you, for the rest of my 5th grade year. But I was crafty and I was smart, and my actions never violated the pact that my mom and I had. I just tiptoed right up to that line, barely. That was the last year I was BAD. Obviously, I went on to graduate from FPD High School. I earned my Bachelor's of Arts from Wesleyan. I got a master's and a PhD from Auburn University in elementary education, and I was a classroom teacher for over 14 years. And boy, did I cringe every time I had a student who acted the way I did. But I also felt a legit connection to those BAD kids. I still do, actually. I go into a school today and the kid's in the back of the room getting punished. I'm like, dude, I'm right here with you. What'd you do this time? Tell me about it. Let's talk. But I then became the kind of teacher who built the relationships with students instead of settling accusations on students. Yeah. And then it happened. October 2004. Almost 30 years had passed since I had laid eyes on Miss Anderson. That was the year that the state of Georgia had this mandate that all classroom teachers had to have this technology class on their records or they would lose their teaching credentials. Most of the newer programs had already built this class in, and so people that had graduated within 5 or 6 years were pretty solid. They had that class. But people who had been teaching more than 5 or 6 years were scrambling to find a place that was offering this class. They were desperate to have this class because they needed it for their credentials. It just so happened that I was teaching this class at Macon State, which is now Middle Georgia. It was actually the actual basis of my doctoral dissertation that I was completing at Auburn. And this is totally an amazing class. I don't know how this managed to happen, but the way this class was set up, it was totally hands-off as far as prep. Somebody, some magical person at Macon State, I never saw a class roll. I would walk into this classroom, and the classroom would be set up. It was this huge amphitheater that seated 100 people, and there were 100 computers in it. And I taught in the well, and the computers were all up here, and people were sitting at their computers. But I would come in, And name tags would be on top of the computers. All the materials, all the stuff had been printed and ready for me. Everything was set up and ready. And all I had to do was come in and go, do my little thing, do my thing, and go and leave. I didn't even have to clean up. It was an amazing setup. The way the class was set up, it was taught for 2 weeks, every night for 2 weeks. There was a 1-week hiatus, and there were 2 more weeks every night. Interestingly, at this time I'd been married to Howard Wilcox for more than 14 years, and I was no longer Virginia Bowman Wilcox. Also, sadly, that was a time that my mom's health fell into bad situation. The day after I taught the class for 2 weeks, literally that class ended on a Friday and my mom passed away on the Saturday after that first 2-week hiatus, or first 2-week class. Which was kind of good and bad timing because I had that week hiatus to take off and deal with some grieving and arrangements and things like that. And toward the end of that week, as the next 2 weeks stint was coming up, I even thought to myself, maybe I should get somebody else to take over. I don't feel quite ready to be back in the saddle and be back teaching. And then I heard my mom's voice. You made a commitment. You said you were going to do something. You follow through. That's what we do. So I did. And that first night back, I had 2 weeks, had a week hiatus where I buried my mother. And I'm back after that first 2 week, that hiatus. And for some reason, that classroom was set up differently. The first 2 weeks, all the name tags were showing just the participants' first names. And when I came back after that hiatus, the name tags had been turned around, and it was the participants' first and last names that I was seeing. There were 80 people in this classroom, and I had not built relationships. There's so many, and there's so much content. I just really had not talked or made any kind of connections with any of them. But about at one point in that class, I looked up and I see this name tent that says Bobby Anderson. Spelled the exact same way that my 5th grade teacher, Bobby Anderson, spelled her name, B-O-B-B-I. That's a very uncommon name, way to spell the name. In the middle of class, there wasn't much I was going to be able to do about it or say about it, but it registered, Bobby Anderson, and it clicked. So at the end of class, I'm walking up the stairs and people are passing papers down and I'm collecting papers, and I stop at her desk, at the end of her table. And she looks up and she sees me and she begins gushing. Oh my goodness, I was so worried about taking this class. This was so scary. I've not done anything with technology. I can't even balance, I can't even figure out how to do the thing on my checkbook that does this and that and the other. But you are such a good teacher. I have learned so much from you. You've just made this so easy. And she just, blah, 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 just kept going and going. And I just nodded and waited for her to take a breath. And when she finally stopped gushing about how wonderful of a teacher I was, I said, Bobby, how long have you been teaching in Bibb County? And she said, oh, only 5 years. And I said, oh, okay. All right. And she said, why did you ask? You kind of remind me of someone, but if you've only been teaching for 5 years, then you can't be who I think you are. I said, I've been teaching in Bibb County for 5 years. I've been teaching for much longer. And I stopped and I stared. 30 years had been really kind to her. But in that moment, I could see my 5th grade teacher's eyes looking back at me from a much more wise and mature position. And in that moment, she said, oh my God, Virginia Bowman. And I went, the first thing out of her mouth was, you must hate me. Yeah, pretty much, I do. She grabbed me up in the hardest hug, the tightest hug, even Mariana's hugs are not tight as this. And she sobbed into my ear. Can I tell you, I've never had the heart to paddle another student. Can we get an amen on that one?
Amen.
She shouldn't have fucking been paddling a student to begin. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's go back. Okay.
You got that right.
She said, I can't tell you how many times I wake up at night and I hear you crying. These are my cough drops. Please believe me, I didn't do it. And at that point, I pushed myself away from her and I made eye contact and I said, "Can I tell you, those really were my cough drops?" That night, we both hugged and we sobbed and we cried for a few minutes more, and we finally decided that we were going to go to dinner to catch up. Many more tears were shed that night, especially when I explained to her what had just happened personally, and my mom just passing and me making the decision to actually come in and take this class. She cried when I told her about the pact that my mom and I had signed and put on the refrigerator before 5th grade. But then she opened up and she revealed to me an age-old teacher secret. You see, in every school, there is this place called the Teacher's Lounge. You think it's a place where teachers can go and they can rest and recoup and grab a quick snack, make some copies between class, socialize a little bit, just kind of relax. It's not. It's a toxic place. It's evil. The environment in that place is full of gossiping and griping. And one of the most toxic and time-honored traditions that takes place in the Teacher's Lounge is the act known as the sharing of class list. This is when the 4th grade teacher takes a look at the 5th grade teacher's list and says, "Oh, you have Becky. You'll just love Becky." Or in my case, "Oh dear, you've got Virginia." Let me tell you about Virginia. So in my case, that day of the cough drop incident, I didn't stand a chance. Mrs. Fortson, my 4th grade teacher, had already filled Mrs. Anderson's ears with numerous stories, and let's be honest, they were all accurate. I'm not going to back down on that. All of them, 100% accurate. All about my shenanigans. Miss Anderson's mind had already been made up about me long before I took even one step into her classroom. It didn't matter how loudly I cried. My reputation had preceded me. That night, Miss Anderson and I cried, we sobbed, we reconnected. The technology class ended, and in the next week or so, and she invited me to go to dinner with her one more time to celebrate the fact that she had passed the class. Because she was really worried about that. At dinner that night, she gave me a gift. And that night, I pulled this ceramic pumpkin out of the gift. Even though it had been 30 years, I recognized it almost immediately. My mom made handmade gifts for almost every single one of my teachers. And because I hated Miss Anderson so much, I stopped delivering them. I didn't take Miss Anderson's gifts to her. I put them in the trash. This was one of the many items my mother frequently made as holiday gifts. And sure enough, if you want to come up afterwards, you can see my mom's name and everything is carved into the bottom of this. "You didn't know she gave me that, did you?" Miss Anderson said. "I guess she figured out that you weren't delivering the the gifts when she stopped getting thank you notes," which was an ancient old practice that people actually used to handwrite. Give them back to people so you knew you actually got the gift. So once my mom stopped getting thank you notes, she knew I wasn't delivering the gifts. At one point, she must have just started delivering the gifts to the school herself. She just started taking them. She said, "This is one that sat on my desk for years, and each time I pull a candy from it, I have thought about you and the lesson I learned about paddling." Can we get another amen? Thank God. But now I think it's time that this returns home. In the tag, she gave me this card. "Dear Virginia, I can't tell you what a delight it has been for me to be your student, however a bit embarrassing for me at times. You are truly a gifted teacher, and I imagine a blessing to many children. I am so glad our paths have crossed once again. This gift has been a treasure for my family for 26 years now. I hope that your family will find it and enjoy it as much as we have. A teacher gift for the teacher. Thank you and Merry Christmas. Love, Bobby Anderson." Of course, we sobbed, but in that moment, I knew I had been given a gift. The timing of this reconnection to coordinate so closely with the passing of my mother could not have been a coincidence. This was my mother upholding her end of the pact 30 years later. This was me finally being believed. They really were my cough drops. This was me finally realizing why all these years as a classroom teacher, I never sat in the teacher's lounge and participated in that gossip and that griping. This was me realizing why I never listened when those teachers came and said, let me see your class roll. Let me tell you about the students in your class. Instead, I preferred to allow each student that walked into my classroom an opportunity to start that year fresh and anew, regardless of how they had behaved in years past. But most importantly for me, this was realizing that being canceled doesn't mean that it has to be forever.